So there's some really sympathetic British voices here. You tell him, love, ruddy loudmouth Yank. Oh man, that woman gonna whop you. So there's lots of comedy here, and the British aren't presented as the villains here at all. Far from it. It's the GIs who use the language nigger and jigaboo and that kind of thing, which is very unpleasant. And then it's at this point that Levy weaves in this kind of war motifs into this chapter. She's making a very important point here about how there's this ridiculous, petty little war that's going on in this little village in Lincolnshire, when really there's a much bigger and more important war to be fought, and everybody is on the right, is on the same side. So that's the important point that she's making here. We've got this kind of, idea about Napoleon and Wellington before Waterloo. The usherette had ironically drawn up a battlefield by segregating the customers in the cinema. Moving on to the next page. Again, we've got kind of more war motifs. We've got battle cries there. And then there's some really comic descriptions about the way that these people are behaving, with the trepidation of picnickers before a stampede of bulls, people toppling over, domino effect, a woman with a handbag flailing, beating up these burly men who are ducking her blows and so on, and this woman finally rattling through the crowd like a laxative. And, Gilbert here is a very witty, of course, Levy creates Gilbert as this very witty narrator. And it makes all of his accounts interesting. Again, another moment of seriousness. How could the harmless Whitey heat the blood and jangle the nerves as the established nigger, jigaboo, and sambo? And there's a very serious comment there about language that's used in sort of pejorative terms and so on. Again, in the war motif, they're about to start their very own uncivil war. A mention of no man's land there. This is, and again, there's still some light-hearted, even as things get really, really violent. There are still some light-hearted descriptions. And then the tone changes when the military police, the American military police, arrive with their white caps bubbling like foam, and then them kind of, bashing defenseless skulls, crushing them like nutshells. So very, very serious tone suddenly. And we've got the irony here that these military police, who are supposed to be coming in and extinguishing the kind of flames of this fight, actually end up adding kind of oxygen to this dying flame, and then it ends up blazing like an inferno. Very heavily ironic as well. And then on the last couple of pages, there are some really shocking descriptions of blood spilling, dense as crimson cloth down before his eyes, and so on. And then the gunshots which end up killing Arthur. Irony again. An MP overlooking my RAF blue, concerned only with the colour of my skin. So it's the USA military police really that are presented as the villains, the antagonists here. Graham, the gun still smoking, careless in his hands. It's kind of loaded with emotion, that, isn't it? A really shocking description of Arthur. He had been shot in the jaw. His head burst and obscene inside out by the bullet. And then the ridiculousness of that comment, get away from her nigger, in all of this tragedy. Arthur Bligh had become another casualty of war, but come, tell me someone, which war? And so that's the main point that Levy's making in this particular episode, that this was a ridiculous war, a ridiculous battle to fight in this little town when there was a much more important war to be fought. So obviously this episode is used by Levy to kind of showcase Gilbert's wit and his intelligence, and there are some very funny, very entertaining descriptions. But the strangeness about it is that Gilbert kind of isn't surprised by these events. He seems to take everything in his stride, which kind of makes us understand that this was just one episode of many, and that this behaviour was endemic in this era. And of course this is Levy's critique of British society, well, Western society, or perhaps more so a critique of the Jim Crow laws of segregation, which had no place in Britain at this particular point, had just been transported here because there were so many American GIs in the village. And so the military police here are the villains.